So this is what we're dealing with, and this is fundamental. This is like a really important concept. This when we live in a time of loss of sense making, because that's natural. We can go into a state of loss of sense making where we almost have to let go of our paradigms. But there's got to be something to come back to, and this we live in a society that didn't have something to really a sort of a rooted framework to start off with in the first place.
So again, it's like we're always coming back to a process, and that there is like a stepwise kind of gradual growth that needs to be there. And so even in these higher realities of things that are, and things were there before we even existed, we have to be able to contain them in a certain way that's healthy, that's not overwhelming, that we can come back to kind of our humanity after experiencing this loss of self. And that's actually a higher mode of being in the world. You know, it's that higher, safer, and more mature, I would offer. And I would maybe even say more Muhammadan.
Well, it's the baqa. It's what we call baqa from a spiritual perspective. It's subsistence, coming back from the fana, the annihilation. And people say, what are these terms? These are all high. But they're real. Because someone says to me, you know, I want to experience fana. I want to be annihilation of the self. And I say, you do it every night. You go to bed, you know, and you go into a delta state.
Yeah.
And this is really important. Like now they're using, I really like this framework. I find it very helpful to frame things, is that they talk about, you know, beta and alpha and theta and delta, these states. And what's so interesting is the beta state is mulk. It's like you're in the world. And the beta state is basically the fastest pattern. You'll see it moving like this. It's almost you're engaged in the objective world, and you're almost pulled by it, and you're working with it. So it's quite a frantic state where you're engaged. And then we move into alpha state, where the hertz per second, they come down and they slow down. Is that what we're in now? We're in a more introspective state where we can actually learn. We're more perceptive. We're more open and more perceptive to something other than ourselves. Then we move into theta state, and theta state is that liminal now. This is where there's an element of loss of self to some degree, where you're letting go to your sense of self. And we experience that when we're feeling a bit tired and we're drifting into bed. We almost feel like our sense of self is a little bit, and that is a mode, that state of being at that point is where we're touching into the liminal space, and we're able to allow something in. So I've heard, I don't know whether this is true, but I read that Einstein, when he was really struggling with a concept he was working with, he used to sit in a chair and have something like some ball bearings or something in his hand, and he would go into this theta state, this almost where your sense of self starts to almost open up to something bigger, and he'd have the ball bearings in his hand so he wouldn't fall asleep. He wanted to, because he'd have these concepts, then go into this state, and usually he'd have inspiration. And that's REM as well, because we've still got a sense of self, because you're sleep, when you're in REM sleep, you're seeing things, you're dreaming, so you've still got a sense of self there. And then we've got deep sleep, which is delta, which you've got complete loss of self completely. You're in fana. I says, so you're experiencing fana every night. You know?
So you wake up, literally, you're the higher maqam.
Well, and what you said is that because, well, what's so important there, I was reading excerpts from a book recently on sleep, the wisdom of sleep. And he was saying that one of the wisdoms they think, and what's so amazing about sleep and dreaming, we don't really know, you know, because it's dealing with a realm that we'll never be able to really quantify and get to the bottom of it. But one theory was, which I liked, was it's emotional processing when we go to REM sleep. So people who have had some sort of emotion, some emotional turmoil in the day, they found with subjects, people people they were experimenting with, that people who were able to go into REM sleep, they woke up and they're emotionally a lot better, in a better place. People who can't get in REM sleep, that like disturbed sleep, it's constantly being disturbed, they can't emotionally process things, and so they stay in their agitated state. So actually we need to go into that sort of some sense of loss of self, so like a loosening of the self, in order for us to let go. And so we're experiencing, these are states whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, we're going through these things constantly. But the thing is, I love that C.S. Lewis quote. He says, "What we learn from experience depends very much on the philosophy we bring to the experience, though."
Mm,
And
totally.
that's, as Muslims, we need a cosmological framework to understand. And that's what we're doing here. We're understanding, this. Anyone that wants to go into psychology, anyone wants to go into spirituality, has to understand their framework of what's working here. And so these videos are fundamental for people to really understand, these concepts we're sort of musing over and really trying to understand. This is fundamental stuff. And Imam Ghazali mentions that. He says so many scholars didn't really grasp these concepts. And I think the more we sort of sit with them and almost sort of meditate over them, the deeper understanding we get from them.
Inshallah, that's my intention with this as well.
So we do another year. We repeat them in a year's time. We've probably seen them from a very different perspective.
Yeah, inshallah, that'd be great to do kind of part 2.0, connections 2.0 at some point once we finish these. And continue to refine these, because these are so important, And when you were speaking, this liminal space, the barzakh, I think, is what we say really the dream world is. And it's like this interspace. And so I had this kind of connection where when you said the sleep is where we process our emotions, and the heart is the kind of locus of emotions. The heart is that interspace between the nafs and the ruh, kind of this center place that kind of reaches up and roots down. And so in that kind of capacity, when you sleep, you allow the heart to open. There's an opening of the heart. And that's a great, we can do that even with one another. I think that in intimate encounters that the heart can open as well. But it's like this inbuilt rahmah where we can actually go and surrender to Allah Ta'ala, and that being a process that we can go into and open up our hearts and process that. That's really beautiful. And what you find now in the modern world is people don't really sleep. They're staying up late.
Yeah. They don't dream as well.
And they don't dream. And they don't enter into delta, never mind delta, REM or delta. And so they're waking up unrefreshed. They're tired throughout the day. They're drinking coffee. They're burning out their circuits, with Red Bulls and caffeine and whatnot, and pushing themselves and furthering that connection to their hearts. Really, all of these lifestyle rhythms in some way are there to foster that deeper connection to our heart. And this is one of the really deeper elements of the Sunnah, is the lifestyle of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not there just this, romantic or just cute kind of, the Prophet ﷺ ate with his right and he didn't drink and he would sip this way. These are elements of trying to perfect the human constitution. This is the way to do that. It's very deep. And so when the Prophet ﷺ would sleep early and would rise in the middle of the night, he's expressing really the ideal for the human nature and how to optimize its physical well-being as well as the spiritual well-being, the capacity for the heart to find its rendering, its balance, and for the ruh to be able to reach upwards and find what it's longing for.